Welcome to Zooming In on Hate, where we offer some clarity on the world of online hate, one conversation at a time. From policies and strategies to the latest trends and themes, we will zoom in on what really matters in making the online space safer and transparent for everyone. My name is Lydia El-Khoury.
And my name is Jordi Nijenhuis. And today we are focusing on a concerning series of events that have taken place in Europe in the past year. We've seen how online hate and disinformation doesn't just stay online, it spills over into the real world. And interestingly, some real world events can also spark a surge in online activity. So it's really a two-way street.
Exactly, Geordie. This episode is called From Social Media to the Streets and Back Again, and we'll explore the cycles of influence between social media and our streets. Why do certain events online result in real world consequences? And how do offline events feed back into the digital space? And let's not forget, this isn't just an abstract discussion. We're talking about tangible recent events, riots in Ireland, the UK, and more recently in the Netherlands, where social media played a significant role in escalating tensions. So, Geordie, as part of the European Observatory of Online Hate, we recently published an article on the riots in Amsterdam. So, you're based in the Netherlands, so you were close to the events. Can you run through what happened over those few days with us?
Oof, how much time do you have, Lydia? Because that was a complicated incident. To start at the beginning, the local football club, Ajax Amsterdam, was playing Maccabi Tel Aviv, which is obviously an Israeli football team. Before the match, there were a couple incidents in Amsterdam, clashes between Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters and local people from Amsterdam, including an incident where a local taxi driver was attacked. Some pro-Palestinian protesters were attacked, and Maccabi fans were taking down like Palestinian flags that were hanging all over the city. To give this a little bit of context, we had protests in the Netherlands that turned violent when it came to the conflict in Gaza. So loads of pro-Palestinian protests were, well, there was a police crackdown on it. Protesters didn't feel like they were hurt. So there were some tensions already, especially in the city of Amsterdam. It's a multicultural city. There are loads of people living there who are Muslims. So, of course, this is a sensitive topic. And this was just before the day of the match. Then on the day where the match was being played, there were more incidents. Maccabi fans, when they went to the football stadium, they were chanting anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian chants and songs, but also some clashes between Ajax supporters, local Amsterdammers, and those fans. Now, it turned extremely violent, and we will probably zoom in a bit more on this later, when apparently there were online calls for a Jew hunt. So this is where it really got tense and extremely violent, because after the football match, when the Maccabi Tel Aviv supporters came back into the city center of Amsterdam, some of them were attacked by guys on scooters, taxi drivers. They were actively hunting for these people, so they were sharing information online where to find Maccabi supporters so they can beat them up. In the end, 20 to 30 people were injured, 5 were hospitalized, 71 arrests were made, including 49 Dutch nationals, 10 Israelis. But afterwards, it became a really shit show when media started to report on it and politicians started to speak out about these incidents.
It sounds very complicated, but thanks for breaking it down and for explaining in detail what happened when.
And it's super sensitive, right? Because it's obviously a very polarized topic. So it's very important to get nuance in here. And it's also hard to find this nuance because it was scattered all over the city. There wasn't a very clear picture about what happened that day. And then when people start reporting about an apparent Jew hunt in Amsterdam, of course, that's going to make headlines.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you talk to us about what your research brought to light about the unfolding events? What did the data show you? Because that's the most important thing in an instant like that, is that we stick to the facts, we retrace our steps and make sure we've got the evidence, quantitative and qualitative evidence to back up, a kind of an analysis about the situation.
Absolutely, and that's what I did through the European Observatory of Online Hate. I set up a channel looking at this incident, trying to capture as many social media posts referencing the incident or incidents in Amsterdam. And in the end, we collected 88,000 posts mentioning the incidents, and of course, that gives us a good insight into how these topics are being discussed online. So we've got a data set of about 88,000 posts between November 7th and November 20th. So we could really monitor what happened on the day itself, but also how does this echo through in time? What are the longer term effects? So on November 7th, we saw some online activity, for instance, mentioning the attack on the taxi driver and some violence before the match. But it wasn't very hateful. It wasn't discussed in a very hateful way. And it also garnered limited engagement. This changed when the apparent Jew hunt happened on the streets of Amsterdam around midnight. So that led us into November 8th, and people started reporting about a Jew hunt in Europe, a Jew hunt in Amsterdam. Of course, historically very sensitive. People called it a pogrom, which is an old term to describe a specific Jew hunt, almost a razzia, right? So it brought these like historical traumas with it, and that surged online. Loads of conversations surrounding these topics, surrounding these words. A lot of hateful discussions about it as well, both blaming either Muslims or Jews. And um, this was driving high engagement. Then the day after, on November 8th in the morning, newspapers started to report on it, and very prominent political figures, they also posted about this online. Geert Wilders, Joe Biden, Emmanuel Macron, Justin Trudeau, they all condemned these events as anti-Semitic without having like a very nuanced overview of all the things that happened in Amsterdam. They clearly called it anti-Semitic attacks. This needs to stop. It's a pogrom. It's a Jew hunt. Probably also sparked by those online conversations, because the frame about everything that happened was really about anti-Semitism and not really about hooliganism or just thugs clashing on the street. And then after that, we saw loads of political consequences in the Netherlands specifically, where our government started discussions about youth, and especially youth with a Moroccan background being the problem. They call this an issue of integration. And loads of social media users, they copied those frames. So they copied the frame of a Jew hunt, a pogrom, and then blaming it on the Muslim minority in the Netherlands.
Great to see the detail of the progress of the narratives online. What's striking is how viral it went, and how viral some parts went and other parts didn't. Um, and particularly the role politics and politicians had to play in that. Tell us what you saw in terms of narratives, Geordie, and the role that those kind of narratives played in the polarization of different communities in Amsterdam. It must have been a divisive incident.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the example of the Amsterdam mayor, Femke Halsema, illustrates this perfectly. She's from the Green Party, and she has been targeted by the far right for years now. On the night of the incident, she framed the incident as a pogrom, literally using those words. But later, when more nuanced information came in, she regretted that term, because she said, this is heavily politicized, and it's turning into propaganda, really. A report of the city of Amsterdam kind of describes, in my mind, the incident perfectly. So they call it a poisonous cocktail of anti-Semitism, hooligan behavior, and anger about the war in Palestine and Israel and other countries in the Middle East. So that's how they described, after doing some research and investigation, they described the incident as such. And I think that captured it perfectly. Obviously, there were some anti Semitic elements in there, because people called for a Jew hunt. And we saw videos online of Jews being attacked and being abused by, hateful language as well. So, but on the other hand, hooliganism was also part of it, plus a lot of anger and frustration about everything that's happening in Gaza. So it was a mix of many things into one. And she framed it immediately as a pogrom. And later she came back, she apologized for it and said, I shouldn't have picked these words. But that framing stuck and caused more polarization because everyone internationally started using that frame. All the posts from all the other political leaders, they were only talking about anti-Semitism and just that. So I think that really describes how once a frame becomes accepted by a majority, it just lingers.
And it's very hard to unpick. And actually, Geordie, you've just laid bare, I think, something that's very, very important to remember when we're talking about social media is the lack of nuance. There is it
Oh yeah.
everything has become black and white in our worlds. The polarization that Dare to be Grey is was set up to counter is entrenched. It's getting worse by the day. Stories like the Amsterdam riots are absolutely not black and white. There are so many shades of nuance to that story, and every
Hmm.
part has a role to play to building the big picture. And it's important to go back retrospectively and to analyze them, and because we've got to bring nuance back. We really have to bring nuance back. In 2025, we got to make room for it.
I totally agree. And for me, this illustrates how easy it is to polarize on social media, especially when there are real world events happening. So it's not just that the online is influencing that behavior on the streets in Amsterdam, but also the streets are really influential for more polarization online. Because the days after, basically the entire conversation was either anti-Muslim or anti-Semitic in the data we found. There was no one asking for people to, oh, maybe take a breather, maybe reflect that it's more complicated than just anti-Semitism or just anti-Muslim hate.
So what's your overriding findings from that, Geordie, from the analysis you did from the article you wrote?
I think there are three things that really stuck with me. One is how deeply the polarization surrounding the conflicts in the Middle East go. Because whatever happens, people will start using that as a frame. So everything that's happening in Gaza, everything that's happening in the surrounding countries, it does have an impact here in Europe as well. The second thing that really stood out is that language and framing, especially from people with influence, is very important. Politicians, media outlets, once you start framing an incident as anti Semitic, everyone will frame it as anti Semitic. And there's a big role for politicians and media outlets there to look for more nuance, as you mentioned. And then the third thing that really stuck with me is that, rectifications or going back on your words or taking a more nuanced perspective after you've already built up that frame, it's not effective at all. Femke Halsema, the mayor, she came back to her words. She came out with revised statements. She wanted to temper the initial reactions, but the damage was already done.
Thanks for sharing that, Geordie, and thanks for your analysis on that. I mean, I think it's important, and I think we're going to continue to do that with incidents that flare up, that bring together online and offline
Absolutely.
narratives over the course of the next year. So, while the riots in the Netherlands highlighted how local tensions can be fueled by online narratives and vice versa, this is not a phenomenon unique to one country. Across the North Sea in the UK, we've seen similar patterns play out where social media, disinformation, and hate speech escalated into real world violence in the summer of 2024. Now, to get a better understanding of how online hate spills into the real world unrest, we spoke with Iman Abu Atta during the EOOH annual conference in Budapest. Iman is the director of Tell Mama, an organisation dedicated to tackling anti Muslim hate in the UK, and she shared some really powerful insights with us into the UK riots last summer, really highlighting the role social media played in amplifying tensions and fueling unrest. So let's hear from Iman now.
So within the context of the UK and specifically post abhorrent stabbings of the three young girls in Southport, we documented a few accounts that have used misinformation and disinformation online, on X and on Telegram, to promote a narrative that the individual or the suspect is someone who is of a refugee background, an asylum seeker, and of a Muslim background. That narrative, unfortunately, has been amplified a lot on social media platforms on different levels, but triggered and mobilized entities, organizers that come with extremist views, some of them of far right views, to mobilize, organize communities that belong to these views to take violence to the streets in the UK. The first part of the misinformation was that the individual, that he's an asylum seeker that has arrived a year ago on a boat, that was shared by a businesswoman in the UK on X. That businesswoman said that she today regrets it, and she feels that this is the most probably the most problematic thing she's ever shared, and that she's paying a huge price for it, because on the back of this, that spiraled obviously what we've seen on our streets in the UK. But equally as well, we've seen accounts like an account called Channel 3 Now, which obviously if you hear or if you read that account, you feel that's a genuine news account, or that's maybe a trusted account that I should look into and check what they're promoting. They promoted the same narrative, that the individual is an asylum seeker and is of a Muslim background. That account actually is based in Pakistan. And that account again promoted that narrative, that then later on deleted that tweet. But in the meantime, that tweet has been shared and viewed by over 2 million people, had several impressions. So again, the amplification and the impact of it has been huge. And what is worth noting is that on the back of screenshots of these accounts, that's how the mobilization happened. And because there has been a shift in the dynamics between the online world and the offline world in terms of what we've seen following the protests, that's why the judiciary in the UK decided to actually say and actually take away the anonymity of the suspect, who was under 18 at the time, because under the law you should not share their details, because they wanted to calm communities, to actually say the person is actually someone who is born in Wales. He has got he's of a Rwandan background, but he's actually someone who's born in Wales and is not an asylum seeker, nor a Muslim person. And that obviously triggered entities, as I said, to actually mobilize online and offline, with communities feeling vulnerable. So minority communities, refugees, asylum seekers were singled out alongside Muslim communities by those far-right driven individuals that decided to take violence to the streets, decided to attack mosques, decided to attack legal centers, refugee centers, to arson an accommodation that was actually accommodating refugees in South Yorkshire, in Rotherham. And that rhetoric that continued to drive that online hate and extremism continued to take place, and still continues to take place. But I think what we saw as well come out of this is some that have used that rhetoric online to promote and terrorize other communities. So this was not limited just to the UK, and our work within the investigative research that we do online, but also in monitoring online hate and extremism, it goes beyond the UK borders. It also expands to Europe. One of the things that we've seen is some of that narrative has been pushed by individuals that belong to neo-Nazi groups in Finland, so Finnish individuals, individuals in Nordic countries that actually posted memes and posted information to actually call on terrorizing Muslim communities and asylum seekers in the UK. Equally, we've seen on TikTok, there was a video that German counterparts were very concerned about. That TikTok video was from a German individual, again with far-right views, that promoted a song in German, but alongside this it said, "Anglos, take back your country," with really elements around white supremacy. attached to it, as well as, and the main concern as well that we've seen on a platform like Telegram, where there were organized groups that were put out. Some of them were called around Southport stabbings. Those ones were aligned with far-right groups, and the admins even of some of these groups were individuals that are based in Europe or based in Finland. And those actually groups have promoted the Christchurch video. A video that promotes the Great Replacement Theory, a video that talks about the terrorist attack that was committed in 2019 against Muslim communities in New Zealand, a video that should not be found on the internet 5 years on, but nevertheless, this video has surfaced back on and actually has resurfaced actually, and it was shared on Telegram and equally on other platforms that managed to screenshot that, hash that video, and still use it on I'd say the bigger platforms like X, Meta, Facebook, and others. So that's another concern, because you're kind of in a way prompting as well people to commit further attacks and terrorizing as well communities. Attached to the online world in terms of misinformation and disinformation, and that translates really to violence on our streets and attacks on communities. One of the things as well that we've seen is the manipulation of certain groups to attack other minority groups. So it was kind of in a way conquer and divide. So if my enemy's enemy became my friend at this moment in time, and we saw a translation of that and transcending that as well. Obviously, not just in England, we've had those as well protests and those far-right marches as well in Northern Ireland, in Belfast. And we saw as well that in Belfast, when these marches took place and attacks on, again, businesses that are of Middle Eastern background, Muslim background, and other places that where minority communities are and asylum seekers are, we saw as well that there were joint forces by far-right groups that came from Ireland, from the Republic of Ireland, that actually decided to join forces with far-right writers in Northern Ireland. And those far-right groups that we saw are joining the Northern Ireland writers were the ones that as well were involved in actually what happened in November 2023 in Dublin. Where the manipulation and the use of attacks on children were kind of weaponized to actually take violence to the streets, take disorder on the streets and attack communities.
And what factors do you think were in play during the riots? And I suppose by extrapolation, similar factors were probably in play in the Dublin riots in November last year, as you said.
A great question. I think a few things I think we need to look at in that context. The riots and what drove individuals to take violence to the streets, whether it's in Dublin in November 2023 or whether it's in England in August 2024, did not happen in vacuum. And this is something that has been going on and bubbling under the surface and continues to bubble on the surface within the data set and our work over the 12 years of our existence. We've seen the same rhetoric promoted online in 2014 in Facebook, on Twitter at the time, and on other platforms that then at the time, I know many of these platforms did not have community guidelines in place, did not have ways to report hate. They were still getting a grip on what to do. Not that some of them are doing it now, some of them are even regressing even more backwards now. But language that we've seen resurface online, attacks that we've seen on minority communities, asylum seekers, and Muslim communities specifically, is language that we've seen and we monitored and we proved that it is language that has been promoted by far-right individuals already in 2014 onwards, okay? So again, we're going back 10 years, and we see the implications of that language that was not tackled then, or even addressing the phenomena that there's a rise in the activity of the far-right that is highly organized, highly mobilized, that eventually has caused violence on our streets and created a level of fear and anxiety within minority communities and Muslim communities that we've never seen before in the last decade. So I think one of the things that we need to look at that did not come out of vacuum. The second thing we need to look at before we go into the similarities between what happened in Dublin and what happened in England, what happened in Ireland and what happened in England, is a major point that, let's say that suspect that committed the abhorrent stabbings in Southport was of a Muslim background or was an asylum seeker. Does that justify the violence that has happened on our streets? Does that justify people doing what they've done, terrorizing communities? It does not. So I think that's a caveat that I think we shouldn't forget, because sometimes we kind of think that, well, the person was not an asylum seeker and was not of Muslim background, so hence we have taken the action that we have taken, and this should not have happened. But even if he was, or she was, or whoever they were, this should not happen, and this should not be allowed to happen. And again, this is something that has been fermenting for a long time, that anti-migrant, anti-asylum seeker narrative, the political discourse that have been driving it, the anti-Muslim rhetoric. I mean, if you look at it in the context of Ireland, and you look at it in the context of England, and you look at the background of the individuals that have been arrested, the ones that are being prosecuted at the time and sentenced, you would see that there's a few similarities around them. One, there's a grievance that both sides have been talking about migration and about asylum seekers and about communities, foreigners coming to take over our work, our payments, our jobs, our residences, and these foreigners are not wanted here. So there is that narrative that is being pushed heavily, and that narrative again did not start now and does not just relate to the context of 2023 or 2024. That narrative goes back to 2014 and even before. And that narrative has unfortunately been being used and has been used in different campaigns, political campaigns, in different debates. Today, main political parties or political parties are in the mainstream now today, use this rhetoric still. And unfortunately, they get away with it. So if I am a member of the public who is from a working class, who actually feel that I'm not getting the opportunities that I need to get, who is now going through the austerity measures that we're all going through in the country, who's not been most probably exposed to other communities, who's always consuming material online about minority communities and refugees being evil, an individual who now looks up to certain politicians who actually talk about migration, talk about immigrants taking over our country, who talk about Muslim communities being a fifth pillar in society. If these are individuals that are saying a politician is saying this, or politicians are saying that and getting away with it, so they feel I'm fine to say it and nothing will happen to me. If these are individuals that have got genuine grievances and that are not being addressed by local authorities, by, I don't know, their workplace, by other entities, these individuals are unfortunately joining forces with extremists, far-right extremists, that decided to take violence to our streets and kind of say, well, I agree with you. I don't want that migrant person to be around, and I don't want that Muslim person to be around, and that Muslim person is most probably not welcoming and does not believe in our values, and I'm going to take it to the streets, and people should listen to me, and thinking in the way that by doing disorder, by committing disorder or committing the acts of violence that we've seen, that they'll be heard. Because if you look at the background of the rioters, both in Dublin and equally in the north of England and south of England during August, you will see that majority are of working class background, majority have got a previous criminal record, majority in the context of England have got domestic violence, I'd say cases or ongoing issues that they have. Majority really tell you, like, well, I do have concerns. I don't want these communities to be around. These communities are taking our opportunities. And again, genuinely, people can talk about these topics and genuinely can have discussion about this, can protest peacefully within the laws of the country and lawfully, and share their concerns. And these concerns should be heard. But it's not by attacking and marginalizing other communities and terrorizing other communities and by actually committing violence, disorder on our streets. And equally, I think when we're talking about communities that have been impacted from Muslim background and other minority backgrounds, it's worth noting that the attacks as well were equally, both in Dublin as well as both in Ireland, Dublin, as well as in England, were targeting as well police forces. They were assaulted, they were attacked. And that element of, police forces are kind of now in the pockets of minority communities rather than serving us as the white majority is something that, again, was a common factor between the Irish context and the English context. That is something that, unfortunately, is not going to go away. While we see that there's already measures around and within the criminal justice process around sentencing and arrests and prosecutions, which is great and highly welcome, I think there's more that needs to be done to address this, because we feel that this is still kind of taking place and bubbling under the surface, and unfortunately this will resurface in different contexts.
And that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about is consequences. What should the consequences be for the people who have committed these crimes by rioting, the platforms, the politicians? I'm just every actor has a role to play in the evolution of this situation.
So maybe let's take it one by one. So if you look at, first of all, the individuals that committed these acts, I mean, in the English context and equally in the Irish context, we know that there has been quite a harsh approach in terms of arrests, sentencing, and prosecutions, which is on one side is extremely good, but I think on the other side, I think we need to look as well at some of the grievances that these communities actually have come with and how to address this, because while yes, arrests, sentencing, and prosecutions are a deterrent for others. And why do I say that? Because when the far right saw that actually their actions have started terrorizing communities on the back of the riots in England, one of the things that they've done is they started mobilizing again online and specifically on Telegram and say that on a certain date, I think they were looking to have 40 protests taking place in front of legal centers and refugee centers and asylum seekers across the country. When that information, and we within the organization shared that information with policymakers and with police forces to actually ensure, one, the safety of these centers, and equally, I think the far right, or those that were mobilizing these riots, were kind of shocked. One, at the level of response, when police forces said, well, we're here and we're waiting for you. If you decide to do it, we will tackle this. But equally as well, the community's response, the wider society that calls out this hatred and this thuggery, to actually kind of say, we will be there waiting for you because you're not wanted and this is not in our name. So that's one of the things that I think that happened as a counter-protest, but that did not at first deter people from actually deciding to take it even further and go and like kind of really try to attack legal centers and protest in front of legal centers and refugee centers. So that's one element of it. So when they saw the responses coming harsher from the police, which is important, and as well communities calling it out, majority within our society calling it out, that was kind of an amazing show of solidarity as well. That kind of in a way stopped this in its tracks. But there's an element of education as well that needs to take place. So individuals that were arrested, that are sentenced, I think there's an element of education that needs to take place alongside their sentencing, to actually educate them about how sharing information and misinformation and disinformation online can lead to what has happened, one, but equally two, understanding other communities, having that mutual dialogue, understanding and respect, and kind of reinforcing the values of the country around tolerance, around inclusion, around diversity. Because I think that is as well something that has been lost because of the rhetoric that has been promoted via different politicians. And on the political side of things, I think there needs to be a collective work amongst media, because media headlines do not help, social media, politicians and communities, civil society, as well as social media platforms, which is a separate entity, which we'll talk about shortly, I think to actually address this collectively, because this is not just the role of civil society organizations, not just police forces, yes, of governments and of political discourse and politicians that need to call it out, but need to call it out as and when it happens. We should not wait. Waiting to say something or say something, it shows as if you're in a way complacent with what's happening, and calling it as it is. I think the one thing that we saw following the Southport riots is that we didn't see any of the politicians come out and say that these are racist marches, or these are marches that are promoting hate towards minority. It took them some time to do that these are marches that are promoting hatred towards minority communities. Yes, they're thuggery. Yes, it's thuggery, acts of thuggery, absolutely. But you're talking about singling out migrant communities and Muslim communities in this. So I think this is important because this as well sets the dynamics and the tone for the rest within those that are looking to promote this disorder and this hate, that actually they say, well, politicians are saying and calling it out, and not listen to the other side of the political discourse that is actually saying and promoting the anti-migrant narrative and the anti-Muslim narrative. So that's another thing. And then social media platforms, which is kind of the, I would say it was the instigator factor in all of this, on the back of misinformation, disinformation, and the global connections online. I mentioned the European connection, but equally as well that disinformation and misinformation was shared by individuals who promote anti-Muslim rhetoric in the US on blogs of theirs that now they've taken those blogs down. But you can see the scale of it, that it's not does not stop. Like the online world does not stop. There's no borders for the online world. Realistically, it does not stop. It does not stop. So I think there's much more that needs to be done on certain platforms more than other. But I think we need to address all platforms respectively. But X played a pivotal role in the protests that have taken place in England, but equally as well in Dublin in 2023 and 2024 in England. So I think a lot of the harmful content, illegal content has been promoted on X, and X, the only thing that, and certain things that they've done sometimes is decided to write a note under a post to say, well, this is not the real thing. The individual involved was this. But the person who sees an image is gonna just take that image as it is and look at the tweet that was above it, and it's not gonna read the notes, first of all, and not gonna share the notes either. That's one. And two, the amount, when we looked within our work about on the amount of data and the amount of accounts that we reported that were inciting violence, promoting anti-Muslim hatred, anti-migrant narrative, anti-Semitic narrative, and they were not taking down, the numbers are huge on X, and that's worrying, because we're really talking about online world and its connection to the offline world and its real impact in terms of violence, and the terrorizing of communities, but equally as well the attacks and vandalism that we saw on police forces and on communities themselves. And as I said, in Rotherham, the hotel, the accommodation that actually was arsoned and put on fire. So I think this is serious. This is not anything that should kind of be disregarded by these platforms. And we understand that these platforms are monetizing on the back of this. They're making money on the back of this. Different individuals with different far-right groups, like Mr. Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley in London, has used this as a platform to even make more money, promote more his narrative, and promote more as well on the back of this some of the protests that he's organizing in the UK, in England, but equally as well prompt some of the actions of what has taken place in Dublin in 2023. So it's different vectors that you're seeing have played a role and continue to play a role. And I think we need to reinforce the laws that we have in the country, whether it's in UK or whether it's in Europe, whether it's the Online Safety Act or whether it's the DSA, to actually ensure that these are implemented as soon as possible, but also understanding that social media platforms, the social media world itself, changes instantly. And those laws need to be flexible to adapt themselves to context, content, changes in dynamics, but also how extremists use and manipulate those platforms to their own good to promote their narrative.
Iman, thank you so much for sharing your incredible knowledge, your expertise, and here's hoping that the year ahead will be brighter than it looks right now. It definitely is. It's very sobering times.
Let's hope so.
Well, poof, Lydia, I think we covered a lot of ground today. You know, looking at how social media influences real world events and vice versa, from the riots in Amsterdam to the UK, it's clear that the online world and disinformation is not just staying in digital spaces.
And what really stood out to me is how interconnected these spaces are and how much work still needs to be done to break these cycles of harm. And that's why frameworks like the Digital Services Act are so important. I mean, they create a regulatory foundation for holding platforms accountable, ensuring harmful content isn't just ignored or left to spread unchecked.
Absolutely. And it's nice that we can bring back your favorite topic into this conversation, because it's a step in the right direction, especially when we look at, risks and transparency. But as we've seen and as we've noticed, the success is going to depend on how effectively it will be implemented and enforced, because there are strong powers at play here as well. And I guess there's still a long road ahead, and something we'll have to keep exploring in future
Yeah,
episodes.
and there'll be bumps on the road for sure. Uh, but let's see how the Digital Services Act stands up and protects our online space and us actually, because it's not just some nebulous in the cloud concept. This is democracy. This is real world. This is our
It's very
yeah,
real.
absolutely. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of Zooming In on Hate. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think we can better address in the spillover between online and offline spaces? Is the DSA enough? Do we need more? Let us know via LinkedIn on the European Observatory of Online Hate. You can also find our research there and just be in touch.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us on Zooming In on Hate. Stay tuned for the next episodes where we will explore the challenges and opportunities in making the online world a safer place for us all. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and follow us on LinkedIn. Goodbye for now.
Bye for now.